We're very much alike. Remember all the happy times we had? We're very much alike. All right. I'll tell you the truth.
Carry All right, let's bring that beat back.
Hello, and welcome to the third and final day of CoMotion 2022. My name is Christina Maloney, and I'm a professor of motion media hailing from the Atlanta campus, and I'm really excited to be speaking with our panelists today as we talk exploring the cliche. So with inspiration surrounding our lives, how can we make original work? We will be exploring the prevalence of cliche, how our panelists develop originality in their work, and what they do to enhance creativity. We'll discuss brainstorming, creating designs, and conceptualizing multimedia ideas when it seems everything has already been done. And the professor in me is urging all of the audience members to engage in the discussion as well. Use the chat to share your own answers and come up with questions for our guests for our Q&A afterwards. So without further delay, I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your role, what studio you're from, and I also like to know where you're located because I know we're scattered across the globe. Aaron, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm the co-founder of Bullpen Studio here in New York City. We're an illustration and design kind of focused motion studio. We've done a lot of work for Twitter and Cartoon Network, and really happy to be here as a former SCAD alum.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Gabrielle.
All right, I'm Gabriel Garrizo. I'm based in Sydney. I have a studio. I'm a person. I usually do like mostly 2D animation, motion design, like kind of loops and stuff. Like that's kind of what I specialize in. I do YouTube videos. I do like a bit of process videos on YouTube. So yeah, right, I guess.
Excellent. All right, Kelly, let's hear from you.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm Kelly Miller. I'm from Brooklyn, and I have a studio called Andor that is based here in Brooklyn, where I am the ECD and one of the partners.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Stephen.
Hi, my name is Stephen Killian. I'm actually one of the creative directors at Envoy. We have 3 offices, one in San Diego, Irvine, and then I am part of the Chicago team. And we focus on kind of digital experiences in space. So that's a mix of both kind of interactive content within environments, but also more pre-produced content and actually some generative stuff as well. So a mix of ways in which motion come into play.
Excellent. And then Noah.
Hey there, I'm Noah Wild. I'm based out of Raleigh. I'm a co-founder of the studio Ravi. We mainly do 2D and we work a lot in tech and SaaS.
Excellent. All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to talk first about a current popular trend the corporate art style. I'd like to hear from our guests. Why do you think this is so popular right now? Who wants to take this? We've been seeing it for a couple of years now, so I'm just kind of curious how this trend is like continuing to. It's everywhere. So yeah, let's hear from you. Noah.
It's very interesting. I see a lot of it with like incorporating more character designy elements in. I think a lot of the reason that became such a trend is because it's introducing the human element into MoGraph work. Whereas before people had to maybe hire expensive actors and go on these big shoots. Now they can sort of have that brand face in a bit of a cheaper, quicker way. But I think it's evolving and people are doing it in really interesting and unique ways to where it's becoming a bit more of just this overplayed cliche, to where people are pushing it further and further and allowing these brands to have a lot more personality than they've been able to have before. So I'm just really excited to see how that is slowly progressing. I feel like it's moving a little bit further away from the cliche as people continue to innovate on it, honestly.
Interesting. Anyone else? Thoughts on this?
I would agree with that as well. I think it's interesting to know that, I feel like it started kind of in like 2016, 17 was really like, when that trend started to pop up with Facebook and some of those other companies, really kind of embracing this style. And there's a lot of like technical challenges that were being considered. I feel like if you look at the guidelines and the way in which they approached it to again, what Noah mentioned, build efficiencies. But now you're starting to see, both sides of it where people are kind of pushing back against it and trying to make it something more, trying to make it even more human. And then you see the kind of generic side of it that shows up in clip art and things like that. So, it's so much in the familiar zeitgeist of like culture that it is hard to get away from it in some ways, which I think is always kind of a fascinating opportunity for creative.
Yeah, I think like cliches, like they have they become a cliche because they actually are good in a way. So like you see like companies using them like kind of effectively, and then everyone kind of wants to blend in and like kind of attach themselves to the visuals and stuff. And that's why, then it gets like starts to get overused, and then it becomes a cliche and everyone wants to try to avoid it because now it kind of has like this, something's attached to it, just like everyone is doing the same thing. But like, of course, like to become a cliche, it has to be like nice in a way. You have to be like kind of good. And now like it's a matter of like going all the way like the other side, or trying to make it feel fresher in a way, because there's like some, like as they put it, you have like so many nice things about this, like adding like the kind of character, adding like like the human touch to it. So I feel just like how to evolve that and use the good parts and make it kind of not as cliche.
Yeah.
I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is not a new idea. I mean, this goes back. We can talk back to fine art movements of this. It's so and what I like about it is what everyone's talking about is the human element. I mean, prior to this, we were probably all looking at recreating white worlds established by Apple. But at least I think that the style is got it, like you said. I like how you can attach it to a brand and or whatever your purpose is, and the character work is really interesting to me. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about how you objectively look at personal work, or even if you can, and what do you do to go outside of the box to develop a bag of new tricks?
Me?
Anyone? Oh, I love.
I'll start then. Yeah. Well, most like if you look at my Instagram and stuff, like because I work 9 to 5 as well, like, but I do like more personal work. Like, so my Instagram is all like personal, and like what I do with personal work to make it like try to push me outside of like my safe zone and stuff. It's just like every single project I try to incorporate something that I want to try and get better at. So like even like I mean like what I think is more important like in personal work is like you have to make it feel like a lab, like a laboratory for improving your skills a little bit, like instead of just like doing something for sake of doing it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
but, I mean like yeah.
I absolutely agree with that. Um, I often will be very inspired by other designers and like other fields potentially, and I'll be like, "Ooh, that little thing that they did right there. I want to see if I can recreate some of that and incorporate it into this other thing I want to do." On personal work, I also like to try and take as much pressure as I can off because I am my own worst critic, as I'm sure many of you can empathize with, um, and treat it as just more of an exploration with less focus on the end goal, which is a bit of a departure from our like usual work where at the end we're trying to communicate something specific or get somewhere very specific. Turn it into a bit more of an exploration. And looking at it objectively, I like to just take some time off. It could be a couple hours, it could be a couple days, and just come back to it and be like, oh, this is actually garbage, or oh, I actually really like this part and this part. And then kind of know where to change things, be able to evaluate it a little bit more objectively.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good starting point too, is just always looking at fields outside of your own field. I think when you see artists take inspiration from other motion designers, other fads, and other illustrators, it's really obvious. So I think it's always best to look at. It's fine to look at illustrators, but maybe look at illustrators or fashion outside of like what we're doing in our space. And to just kind of loop back to the last question too, I think you kind of to kind of tie this all together, you kind of see this happen with other fields of advertising as well, like the whole character-based kind of movement, because influencers are inherently characters, and influencers have essentially taken over advertising. And you look at the Super Bowl that happens, and basically every commercial that you see is tied into specifically celebrities, which again is all basically character based. So I think you're going to see just always there's lots of parallels between what's happening in animation and other advertising sectors that I don't think is always quite apparent on the surface.
Interesting. Mhm. And since we have so many students out here, I like hearing about your ability to do your own personal work. And maybe just on a side note is, how do you find time to do that personal work? Especially like if you said, I go into the office however many hours a day, when do you find the time? Do you try and squeeze it in between pushing work out to clients? When do you all take the time to be able to kind of work on your own personal stuff?
In the morning for me.
In the mornings?
Yeah, like for me, like I work kind of. I feel like I have to do the things that are most important for me, like in the first hour of the day, like especially like exercising and stuff. Like I try to do like first thing in the morning, like I exercise, I do like my studies, and I wake up really early for that because I work 9 to 5. Like and even if you have like you don't work 9 to 5, if you have a studio, like you are there like at the studio like, doing client work throughout it like the whole day, and you have to find like time to do that. And for me, like is waking up really early, like 5:30 in the morning. So yeah, because that's I mean, for me that's escape. Like because if I just do client work, like it's not always fulfilling, and I feel like I need to do like personal projects to feel that I'm kind of creating and being creative and pushing myself forward. And then I had to kind of like confirm like get used to this discipline to like sleeping early and wake up early. I feel good about this. So good for me, my mental health, I guess.
It's your morning meditation. Do we have any other
Yes.
early risers for that sort of thing, Kelly?
Yeah, I get up really early too, and it's the same sort of situation where I feel like if I don't make that time in the morning to work on my own work, whatever that may be, it evaporates completely. So I think yeah, it's just sort of about making a commitment to yourself, and like everybody else has been saying, like don't worry about it. Like this doesn't have to be something that gets hung in a gallery or posted on Instagram. It can just be for you, and I think when you do that type of work, um it inevitably starts to come out in your professional work as well, which then pushes you away from creating cliches because you have started to develop your own creative voice and point of view, and that's important.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. Also, something I remind myself very, very often is that most great ideas start off as very mediocre ideas, and they develop into something great. And so oftentimes I'll like have this too much pressure to have this wonderful idea off the bat. And I'm just like, it's not going to be wonderful unless I don't mind if it's not wonderful. Um, and yeah, I mean, still stuff slips by, like personal projects and like something I'm passionate about. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally forgot to pursue that. And I mean, if time allows, sometimes it's best to just be like, stop what you're doing. If the passion like hits and you're like, oh, I really want to do this, and just allow yourself to like dedicate 20 minutes to 30 minutes to just push on that and be like, feel like I'm in a much better place there. And it's easier to then start like the next day, maybe early, working on it again.
Yeah, I think as a, as a kind of creative lead and working with a team pretty often on projects, I like to ask people what they're interested in and kind of what are their personal projects, just to try to figure out how you can maybe weave it into an actual client work. So, it might not look the same way, but let's say someone's being obsessed with shaders, right? And trying to build custom materials. It's like, how can we make that part of this process? And it might look different, but it would be something that you'd be interested in. And you can have a little bit of like pride in the work you're doing, even if it's not a true reflection of you as an artist, which I think is an important thing.
Absolutely. I think passion is probably one of the biggest differentiators in terms of like making someone's work unique. I think if there's passion behind it, you can see it every single time. I mean, I've been told on certain work that I've done that like, oh, I know that that's like a review video because of XXX. Um, and it's just like, it's really cool to see. I think if there's the passion there, even if you think this thing has been done a million times, go do it for the a millionth and first time, because that passion will show through a little bit. And if you keep doing what you really care about, eventually like that style will shine through, and that passion will kind of create something that's new.
Just adding to that, like just like as we're talking about cliches, like don't worry too much about cliches. Like just I mean, just focus on doing, and I mean, like, and don't waste energy like worrying if that's like the most original. Like how
Yeah.
many like great looking beautiful movies that suck that we've seen. So like if you waste too much time like trying to be just original for the sake of being original, like just like just like do and focus on the message or focus on the technique you're gonna learn and add to your bag of tricks. And it's kind of that's how I approach stuff.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be fun to lean so far into a cliche that it becomes like past the cliche.
Yeah.
Some stuff that does that is really always really fun to see.
And so that the passion, I like hearing this because it's going to segue into working with clients who are wanting that sort of cliche project direction. So how do you sort of delicately handle those situations and trying to incorporate something new and original to make that work interesting? Do you find yourself being asked to do something that you're like, oh, here we go again, or it's maybe not the most interesting thing for you? What kind of experiences do you have with that?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes clients will come to us and be like, we want the video that you have over here, like point to a specific one. We're like, we want that, but for us. And we're like, okay, but that might not be the best solution. Oftentimes, one thing I like to remind myself is that people won't listen to you unless they feel heard themselves. So anything you can do during that, like a discovery call, during those first few touch points with the client to understand where they're coming from and empathize and like repeat back what they said to you so that they feel heard, they feel understood, and ask for clarification at any point. Then they'll be much more open to your ideas because they'll feel like they put their ideas down first. And additionally, if they come to you wanting something very specific, like, oh, we want this style, we have like these references, you can be like, okay, give me a bit. I'm gonna work on this. I'm gonna see what I can do with it. And you can come back to them with like 1 or 2 or 3 ideas. They're like, hey, these ideas are inspired by what you gave us. Like we used your stuff as a baseline and we wanted to really elevate it. And if they know that like it's being done for them and it's being like their thought and effort that they put into curating those mood boards or whatever they gave you, if they see that being reflected in what you've then done for them, it could be very different. It could be very unique, but they feel heard. And that can often lead to great client relationships and them being like, yeah, let's go with the more outside one. Let's go with the more out of the box one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that you know, I run a studio, and that's a slightly different process than like working somewhere or working for yourself as like a freelancer or something. But something that was really important to us when we were developing the studio was making sure that we understood our own brand and like what we wanted to do creatively, and really like focusing in on that and putting work out that met those goals. Because, you know, speaking of cliches, it is a cliche that your last project is your next project kind of thing. Like whatever you're putting out into the world is what people are going to come to you for. So, you know, and you know, and this ties back in with the client work stuff too. Like sometimes, you know, we don't show all of the work that we do, and no studio does. But uh you know, I think when you're young, especially, taking those opportunities for projects that seem sort of like, oh man, this isn't what I want to do, to learn new tools, learn new processes. You know, if you have to make a 3D pill, like make it the best 3D pill ever. Like surprise yourself with the things that you can learn. And um you know, who knows, maybe then you'll move on to like do a project where you make 100 weird pills, and that would be awesome. But yeah, so that's kind of my point of view on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Kelly's completely right. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges when you first get out of college and into the working industry, is when you are working on that not so great project, but you still put in all of that passion and hard work into 100 amazing hills. And then after you do it, the client comes back and kills it. So you really have to learn to like emotionally detach yourself in a lot of ways and just like focus in on the pride of your craft. And on a secondary note, I think this is where you really start to learn the appreciation for what a good producer will do for you at different studios, and how different studios will be able to differentiate themselves from other studios, because manipulating your client and getting your client to trust you and work with you is definitely a completely different skill. And as artists, we're often powerless to that until you start your own studio or work with better producers. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what's really exciting to hear, especially since we have so many students. Is I like Noah, you were saying, I mean, ultimately it's a partnership. It's not just letting them think that they have the right idea. It's being able to evaluate what they want, bring your expertise into it, which is why they brought you in the first place,
Yeah,
to make it this really beautiful experience for everybody's end.
exactly.
Yeah, I
So
think like if you make everything like a learning process, like that's everything there is to it. Like, because you can learn, like if you're doing like retail, whatever, like price change or anything you're doing, like you can kind of optimize, or you can learn like new shortcuts, or you can, you know, like there's always things that you can like be learning every single thing you're doing. Like if you're paying attention, trying to get better at whatever, and then you can use that for something else like later on. Like, so it's
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
how I approach things.
Like you said too, there's going to be those projects that you don't necessarily share. It's the projects that you take. And I like this too, where you can say, maybe this isn't the most easy project, or maybe it's not the most challenging project, or what I expected when I left college. But maybe it's an opportunity for me to write like a series of expressions that now in the future, I'd have my bank of stuff that's going to make my life a lot easier, and to use those opportunities and to seize that. Because one of the things, of course, at school is we really want the students to experiment and try to push as far outside the box as you can, and thinking that that's not how life is always going to be, but to channel that in these projects to stay excited.
Mhm.
Which sort of leads me to, like you were talking, I think, Kelly, about like learning different new techniques and tools. How do you use multimedia or different programs to create versatile works? What are you experimenting with outside of just the traditional, I'm using After Effects, I'm using Cinema 4D?
Well, for me, you know, I'm pretty advanced in my career. So I actually don't do a lot of like hands-on work anymore, which has been an interesting kind of evolution, because earlier in my career, I definitely would have been like, I will always make things, which I still feel like I do make things, but it's a little bit more of like a leadership position where I'm encouraging our staff and our freelancers and our collaborators to like, make the best possible thing that they can. And it's a little bit more egoless. But yeah, I think I'm still very excited about learning and want to continue to grow my own skills. So I've sort of pushed more into like live action directing and script writing and stuff like that. That's a little bit more collaborative, I guess is the word. It's a little bit more about structure and collaborating and like trusting other people. And I think there's people who are really good at that when they come out of school, but I also think there's people who have a hard time with that, myself being one of them. Like I kind of thought I had to do everything myself, or it like wasn't really mine. But I think as you gain more experiences and work with more people, you really start to see like how people can help each other. I mean, I think the producer comment was a great comment too, because producers are often, I mean, I've never done this, but some people will sort of, look down on producers like they're kind of like a thorn in my side because they're telling me I have to be done at a certain time or something. But I think the value of a good producer is like worth its weight in gold. Same with creative directors and, junior animators, like everybody is valuable. So yeah.
The producers are the unsung heroes of, and it just doesn't, every panel I do, there is never not a mention of that person, that Oz behind the curtain of those producers and what they are managed. And I think it's something too, as students who like just thinking beyond, I'm just going to be an After Effects animator or whatever, is that detail project management is something I think is just a beautiful job to have.
Yeah. And I think when you get like further in your career too, like you end up sort of being a producer in your own right. Like I've definitely noticed that about myself. Like even when I was like way more hands-on, I was making spreadsheets to track things, and like people, it's important, aside from, obviously we're talking about like the more creative side of things, but I think actually I would say like in writing scripts and live action directing, part of my strength has been that I'm really organized and detail oriented. So those things come into play like further, when you don't even know it, like when you wouldn't even think like, oh, being like organized will make me a good director. What? Like I never would have thought that, but yeah.
Yeah. Aaron, you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say, my first producer I ever had coming out of college told me producer's number one job is to protect the artist. And I think that's so true. And once you realize that, it'll be really easy to spot the bad producers. And there are many out there that will throw you under the bus and do everything for the client first, rather than protect the artist working on the project. And yeah, I think that as you get older too, you do become more of a producer just naturally, because a lot of producing is protecting yourself and protecting yourself as an artist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I also, I love it. I remember that too when I worked. It was just like the fact that I didn't have to answer emails, or the producers would just let us be creative, and they just handled all the stuff. I didn't want to see the client notes, and I just tell me what I need to know when I need to know. It was just, they kept all that at bay. So the next question I'm going to ask is a little bit, I love this question because we always try to push this. I teach the professional development classes at SCAD, where we're preparing the students for the interviews, the resumes, the reels, that sort of stuff. But one of the things we all often I like to find out is, tell me something that's not on your resume. What makes you sort of unique? And I'd like to hear from all of you what sort of outside hobbies or resources, your ninja skills is what I often call them in our classrooms, is that you have, and also stuff to keep you inspired and expand your own sort of MoGraph work. But I love to hear about like, hobbies, interests.
What I like to say about this, was talking to my wife the other day. There's certain like professions. They're not like they're lifestyles, like rather than professions. Because I mean, like you have to leave a little bit like the art, like the design or everything. Like it's not like you clock in, clock out of the of work, and then you just like you're done. Like you kind of if you like what you're doing, like you're always like you're constantly looking around, like you're walking outside, you see like even not like design related, but like even you see a poster like that draws your attention. That's like a little piece of information that you could keep to yourself that you can probably like use somewhere like and then comes to you like at some like point in time. But I love like going to galleries, you know, I love like reading like magazines and this kind of stuff. Like anything like design, art, illustration kind of interests me. And I feel like you kind of need that's like a something you need to have to be like in this industry. You have to be like always constantly interested in looking at this kind of
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm personally like very interested in lots of adjacent creative fields like photography and fashion. And
yeah.
so often those little things from other projects, from other interesting spheres of creativity come in and impacts my work directly. And I'm like, that's just really cool to see. And I can also see it in some other people's work too. It's wonderful.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say my confession for the panel is that I didn't go to school for motion graphics. I went to school for architecture. So I always like loved motion graphics and tried to like weave that into my storytelling, but I kind of fell into it in some ways as I worked professionally through my career. And I think that there's a beauty to that as well, to say I'm interested in this, and this hobby or the side thing becomes a part of your passion and your kind of professional output is super important. Because there's a lot of jobs out there, and I encourage this of anyone that I kind of work with, is like, if you love UX UI design, you can still do motion design, right? Or vice versa. Or if you love film, who's to say you can't bring that part like into a project that maybe doesn't naturally feel like that would be the solution. And I think there's interesting ways of kind of keeping those tools and those kind of different interests you have in the back of your mind for the right project if you're
yeah,
looking for it.
absolutely. And I met my co-founder Austin in college, and if it weren't for him, I wouldn't know motion design. We both went to school for graphic design. So I think also taking an interest in your friend's passions can always be really interesting. I mean, it offers new insight. And I mean, like, if there's already this other person who's passionate and knowledgeable on something, and so if you can share in that passion, I mean, it lights me up. It does.
Yeah, it's infectious. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
I was
Sorry.
just gonna say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, you go.
I was just gonna say I lived in small apartment buildings for probably the past 12 years, and I just moved into a house. So I finally have like a plot of dirt to like get in and play with, and just getting out there and planting has been like super rewarding for me. On a side note, I will say that your 20s coming out of college is really all about grinding as hard as you can. Like that's the go time of your career, is to really push and make that large push to jumpstart your career. But with all of us saying all this and talking about waking up at 5 a.m., I'm going to have to be the guy and say your health and mental health is always going to be top priority. So, your 20s are going to be go time, but never put it over a priority of your health.
yeah. Waking up early doesn't mean like kind of waking up just to work. Like take care of your health as well. Like do your exercise and stuff. Like health and sleep always first. Like never like sacrifice your sleep and your health. Like then make time for your work after that.
Mhm.
Totally. I agree with that 100%. I think when I'm very influenced by music. Like I've been in many bands throughout my life. So music is really what drove me to motion design from like a pretty traditional graphic design background. So I think it's important just to notice what you like, like if you like music, like like, what is it about that particular song that you love? And like, I think that can start to inform the work that you're doing too. Like, oh, I like it because it's like, you know, really distorted and like fast and loud and angry. Like, how can you make that like a visual thing, you know? And I think that, you know, that's always been really important to me, as well as, you know, art, just like actual art. I think people do end up getting into those cliche loops by looking at, you know, motion design or whatever your like particular field is. I feel like it's not like that deep. You know what I mean? Like, you can't, there's so many other things to look at, so many other things that are cool and interesting, that like it would be a shame if you were only looking at like motion design stuff. Like, you should really like look at every single thing, you know? Like, it's like, look at a plant. Like, plants are cool. You know?
Yeah, I think you've made a really good point, Kelly. I would encourage everyone to become really nerdy about something you don't like, because one of the things about kind of being cliche or feeling cliche is that you have we all have limited palettes, right? In the sense of like what we go to, what we really find passionate about. But if, let's say, you love hip hop and you want to learn something about a different culture or something, it's like, get obsessed with metal music for a while and understand why that's a thing, right? Like, just like, and through that, I think you'll evolve and maybe find things you like about it, or find something unexpected about, you know, something that has cultural relevance to maybe a group that is outside of your own. I think there's an important factor with that.
I mean, I think it's always about just kind of expanding the visual vocabulary and not even realizing how it is doing so in just the motions. I empathize, Aaron. I thought I'd never own a house, and now that I do, I just want to go look out in the backyard and see what kind of dirt I have so I can put the right plants in that soil. Like, I don't know how that aged, where that happened, because I wasn't that person in my 20s, definitely.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. So are you pulling trends or pulling inspiration from old trends, art movements, movies, television, stuff from your childhood? Was there something that maybe that helps you sort of stay sort of hungry and motivated when you're working with a new project?
Well, I actually have an anecdote.
Let's hear it.
We were recently working on this neat little project, and we wanted to go with something a little more Art Deco, but it was hard to pin down the visuals. And so I actually remembered like this old Batman cartoon I used to watch as a kid, and we pulled that up, and it was like the perfect reference. And so we dove into it using those as like frames that we can reference. And I mean, that was just helpful in and of itself. So just like remembering little visual things from childhood has been actually very helpful.
Yeah. I'd say our childhoods are probably why most of us got into this in the first place. There was probably something. Do you all think that? Is there something you can sort of point back to that maybe propelled you to where you are today, or what you were interested in?
I don't know if it's necessarily like a specific event, but right after I was done wanting to be a ninja spy, I wanted to be an inventor. So I think that was a very direct move to just wanting to do creative things, and then right into graphic design to motion design.
I would say inventor / motion artist is I think that sort of aligns pretty perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to see ninja spy / motion designer.
Yeah.
They're one and the same, right? Yeah, they're similar.
I'm not gonna say I'm not a spy, but like,
oh yeah, we wouldn't know. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say I pull so much reference from when I was in my 20s. I mean, like I said, I was in a lot of bands, and like I was really into like the punk rock DIY scene, and that sort of like philosophy for creating things has always been a touch point for me. Even now, like, you know, I think it's part of the reason why I started a studio, because I was like, you know, fuck the man or whatever. So yeah, I think, you know, I do think, you know, most students are probably still developing those references and points, cultural touch points. but you know, just like I said, just being aware of it. But yeah, definitely I love anything that's like sort of has like a DIY, like they made this thing that's awesome, but like they didn't even know that they were making an awesome thing kind of situation is my favorite. Like when I can just see like someone made this video and it is so weird and funny and amazing, and like that is what I want. That is what I want to make in my own work. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
one thing I want to add about this is just I think when you're blessed to kind of have this kind of interest, whereas when you are a kid and just like, oh, like I like drawing, I don't know, like some designers, like interior decorators. Oh, I used to like to decorate my room like from an early age. It's like, okay, it's great, but that doesn't mean that like from later on, like if you didn't have like this kind of kickstart, you couldn't like start from like a later age stuff, because sometimes people just, oh, but I didn't draw as much as when I was a kid, and just like maybe that's not for me. But the only thing is like when you start early, you're just a little bit ahead, but anyone can start at any time. For me, like it's never too late for you to kind of start, and anyone can learn to draw and illustrate at any point in life, like as long as you put the effort. Because when you're a kid, you're just playing, and then you just like have all those years, you're just like practicing, and then you're kind of ahead. But then that doesn't mean that if you start now, like if you can draw like stick figures, like you can be drawing like a nice little, I don't know, anything like a life drawing, like a realistic, whatever. Like it's just a matter of putting the practice.
Excellent. Mhm. So a personal style, this is something that I know, like you were saying, is sort of something that we maybe struggle with a little bit. Um, do you remember how you were able to sort of develop an own style? Is it something that's even conscious? Were you able to figure that out while you were still in college? What was that like for your own processes as learning to develop your own style? Because I think our students would really relate to that, because I know they're trying a lot of different things. Some of them know immediately what it is that they want to do, and some of them take a little bit longer. And I'm not sure that everybody always figures it out after they've left SCAD. It's maybe something that comes a little bit later as they keep going. Do you all have any sort of advice or guidance on helping students navigate that? Like you
I
said.
think that that's the human struggle for me. Like, yeah, because I mean, picking a style and committing to something, like it's essentially saying no to lots of stuff, and then we don't deal very well with losing. Like that's the, if you look at like investing, stock market, like the problem is that we can't lose well. Like we don't know how to lose. And then for me, like picking a style and committing to a style, like is that's why it's so hard for everyone. Because like as soon as you say like, oh no, I'm gonna stick to this 2D flat line, whatever, like this style you pick for you. Like I'm about like 2D design, but and then you're working on that, and you're scrolling Instagram, and you see like a really nice typography piece, or like a 3D whatever, and then just like all of a sudden just like, oh, that's so cool, I want to do 3D as well. And you can't commit like to something because now you want to do a 3D, and now you want to do 2D, and that doesn't, like, I'm not saying you can't do like all this stuff. It's just like if you want to do everything at once, probably gonna fail, or you're gonna like burn like out, or you know. So it's, for me, it's hard to. It has to be a conscious decision of setting boundaries and sticking to those boundaries at least for a certain like period. Like you don't have to commit for life, but at least like for like 3 months, 6 months, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna get as much information I get about like this, and not like, and close my eyes to everything else. That's how I see it like this.
Yeah, I would say I have a little bit of a hard time with the word style, and with people like um putting a lot of weight on that, because I think if you're thinking that way, it starts to become inauthentic, and you know, that that's sort of where like these cliches come from. It's when you're like, oh, like, cool, everyone's doing this like character animation that like even Facebook is buying now, so I'm gonna get really good at that. I mean, cool, but like it's probably going to die out within a couple of years and it's not worth the commitment. You know what I mean? Like I think what's more important is developing your own way of thinking and your own way of your own processes, like your own way of making things, because um the aesthetics are going to change, like as you grow, as the world changes, as interests change, and that's totally cool. Like that's just you evolving. So like just sort of, you know, not putting so much pressure on that, I guess would be my advice. And like I'm very much about like the concept leading the form and that kind of process. And like adding in a little bit of your own personality, always, like that's like the secret sauce, I think. Anytime I see somebody whose work I think is like super powerful, it's because there's like a bit of them in it, and there's like a smart idea behind it, like a intelligence to it. So yeah.
I feel it depends on how you want to position yourself as well. I think, like, because if you're kind of like really style agnostic, again, like kind of thing, like it's more like I think you appeal more like for staff positions, or I mean like even like freelancing, but like studios benefit way more from people that can work like in different, like all sorts of style, like to have like in-house, because then you have one person that can like work in different projects. You don't want like a really specialized artist to be like on your team that I can only do like 2D and just like that. On like that. But on the freelance side, or on the like artists kind of more like side, like you can sell yourself, or like people can come to you as a specialist rather than like a generalist. That's I think what I'm saying. But yeah, it's a choice. Like I mean, like anything for me, like it's just like don't try to take everything at once, because there's so many techniques. Don't try to study 2D and 3D at the same time. For example, like getting the major areas. Like don't try. I mean, like you're just gonna be.
Yeah, I really agree. I also think it kind of just comes down to passion. I mean, if you just keep pursuing that passion, eventually it'll show through, like I said before.
Yeah, I think the professional challenges for people are like, are you a designer or are you an artist? Does style mean an aesthetic or an approach, right? Like I think those are answers that everyone struggles with throughout their career, and I think you exist in different realms at different times too, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? You're not going to be unsuccessful if you haven't defined a perfect aesthetic style, right? And I think that's okay, and it's part of kind of finding yourself and what you want to leave, leave behind in the world, and kind of the work you want to do, and what you're trying to say, which is super
Absolutely. And then exploring different styles and stuff, I think is very important for finding some of that piece of you that really ignites. And process, of course, is, I so agree with that. I mean, learning to trust yourself in that creative process has been something I have to constantly remind myself, because it can be certainly difficult sometimes. Second guessing and imposter syndrome is a big deal for a lot of people. So to sort of learn to trust yourself and just follow what you care about.
Yeah, I'm working on another project right now with another creative, and we were just kind of talking through concepts, and it was interesting to hear their point of view, because they were going through a very similar process where it's like, I made all this stuff, kind of hate all of it, I don't understand, and it's like I go through that, I do that too, almost every project at some point. And I think it's a good reminder that like we're all human, we all kind of have this sometimes like struggle with really thinking our work is like not good enough for sharing. But I think that's actually what's interesting and fun about what we do as creatives.
Yeah, I mean, working with other people, just like the small change from working by myself to working with my co-founder Austin, I mean, that's been massive. Just I think that this is something that probably should have been mentioned earlier in this panel, that working like with your friends on creative projects or with coworkers. I mean, it just completely shifts perspective. And I mean, it lets me personally detach myself from the work in a healthy way, to where it's not just me. It's not just a reflection on how unique I can be, on how great of a designer I can be. It's a collaborative thing, and it becomes more of a positive outlook on it.
Mhm. Excellent. This is super inspiring, and I know that our students are wanting to ask some questions. So I think we're going to hand it over and get some questions from the audience. So thank you. Let's see. All right. 1 second. All right. So the first question comes from Elijah Ben, and his question is, how would you break a cliche? I feel like sometimes I'll get stuck on the same trick effect in a project and dig myself so deep in, I get tunnel vision.
I mean, I think it's a habit. Actually, I have this book that I think I'm going to show you guys.
Oh,
This book, it's called The Talent Code. I actually bought it and gave it to everybody in our studio because it's such a great book, and it's about it's basically just about, I think somebody else was talking about how you can learn anything at any point in your life. Like, you might be a little bit faster when you're like 12 years old learning how to skateboard, but it doesn't mean when you're 40 you can't learn how to skateboard, you know? So that's kind of the premise of that book. And I think that, you know, when you start repeating styles or like stylistic choices, or I always use the same typeface, what the hell, I think that just means you need to like take it off the table and like start brainstorming, like, okay, what else can I do? And if I'm not going to do XYZ, what is another way to achieve the thing that I'm trying to achieve that could do that? And then, you know, try those things, and you might find something surprising, which is always exciting.
Yeah, I think like that's when personal projects come into play. I mean, like you just set that as a goal, like, oh, my goal is just like, I feel like I'm using that typeface or whatever, like every project. So like my personal project goal is not to use it, and then like create something around that. I think that's like a really good practice.
Okay. All right. So we have another question from Sarah Hefferson, and they ask, can you think of a project in which the client did want something cliche, but it flourished into something unique and passionate? What was that process like?
I definitely can remember a project where it maybe wouldn't be cliche, but it was like the familiar solution, right? Like the client was just like, hey, give me the thing that just feels kind of like a given. And I think you can use that as an opportunity to kind of ask what they're looking for in that and why maybe they would want to go with that type of solution. And it goes back to the discussion about having good producers and having a good relationship with the client, where you can actually challenge the expectations a little bit, right? So that you build a shared language. Because a lot of times, I think what we can take for granted as designers is like, we care about a lot of stuff that maybe our client doesn't care about, right? Like they have different agendas, they have a different perspective on what they're trying to solve. And being able to try to find a middle ground with that is super important to start to push them beyond maybe what their comfort zone is. And I think that's the nice opportunity, is when you can say, oh, okay, well, we can maybe do this and it's still solving these problems, but it's also going to be a little bit weird for you, right? And get them comfortable with the weird, right? I think that's something like a nice, important thing to be kind of reminded of.
Get them excited with the weird.
Yeah, because we don't want to just steer them off entirely. We want to work with them. I mean, that's why they come to us in the first place.
Part of wanting that more unique project for them, I mean, it's directly beneficial to them, and so you can show them that.
Yeah.
Be like, I want this to be the best for you as it can be, because we do want to hear them. We want to fully solve their problems, and if you show them that passion, you show them how your solution is doing that, it's likely they'll see it.
Excellent. All right. All right. Another question we have from Sage Moses, and they ask, how do you differentiate the bad producers from the good ones in the industry? What do you
Probably
want
not
in a
something that's
producer?
gonna
Yeah,
probably
I'd
nothing
love
that's
to
going to be
hear.
immediate over time, but over time your pick up on it. And I think it's just the way you see the producer handle the client and how they handle responsibilities with the client, and then communicate them back to you, the artist, and the rest of the team. You want a situation where the producer is softening the blow for the artist. A lot of the times, especially coming out of college, I think you get feedback and your adrenaline and your nerves go straight up. And I think, handling that critique and process is really important. And I think, like a good producer will help you with that, and they'll help be kind of the liaison between you and the client. And, I've had bad producers where they've prioritized the client's needs in a way that was really damaging to the overall project, in terms of like shorting the creative process just to get something out the door. And there's always going to be responsibilities, and there's always going to be moments in a project where you're not going to do things like the quote unquote correct way, just because the client's going to have a specific need that they're already in a bad spot. So it's, every situation is like a bit of a gray area. And I think that, I think as you become more experienced as artists, you'll be able to kind of look back and see which producers are good and which are bad, and just always kind of remember that cardinal rule that a good producer will protect the artist.
Yeah, I think we can all agree.
Just add to that. Sorry, like when you see that the producer is too fearful from the client as well, like kind of even like accepting like all the client like unreasonable like requests and stuff, and just like making the team kind of suffer like with crazy hours and stuff. I think that's another
Definitely. Yeah.
problem.
I mean, there's producers I've had that never push back on client feedback. And it's like, that should be a conversation. It's okay to push back on feedback. And that just goes into building that trust with that client.
Yeah, you don't always have to just say yes to everything. And I think that's probably something that's something you learn over time and you get more comfortable with, especially for someone who's brand new, who's going, okay, and then just breaking their backs to try and get it done. Yeah. So another question comes from Anvik, and they ask, when a client comes to you with an idea, should you even think in terms of, this is so cliche, isn't that line of thinking already a little bit limiting? It's just probably a reaction.
I think it's like your natural instinct sometimes, right? To what was said earlier. If you're presenting the work that you want to get in the world, and someone's asking you that they want you to do that for them, right? Sometimes you might be, your first response might be like, I don't want to do that again. I already did that, right? Like I personally hate making portfolios of my own work. Like by the time I'm done, I'm like, I'm happy, the process was great, but I don't want to like perfectly package it because I'm ready to move on to the next thing. That's just like, that's a personality trait. But I would also say the solution you come up with, the concept you should come up with, it should never be the first one you come up with. I remember that there was like some good advice that someone gave me where it's like, you're not really going to have good new ideas until you like are on the 20th or 30th concept you've come up with. So be willing to just throw out those kind of bad ideas and weird ideas, and then try to like nurture them, come back to them, and figure out how they can maybe approach a problem differently. And that's kind of the fun of it, right? So.
Yeah. You realize how bad like an idea that looked so good for you in the beginning, like it's gonna look so bad like after you gave like the time to experiment, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think that'll lead us to maybe one last question that asks, how do you know when to branch out with new ideas or to stay within your comfortable range for a project?
I think my experience with my studio is that basically whenever we do a passion project or an internal project for the studio and release that, we get tons of new work from new clients based on that specific project. And that specific project, the internal project, is going to be the one that we really push the boundaries of our technical ability. So then when we get client projects, it's usually based off of that. It's more rare when you get a client or a project that asks you to kind of push the technical boundaries beyond that. But yeah, it's always kind of like a cycle of personal project for studio, lots of new work. Then you release a new personal project and that brings in more work and so forth.
Yeah, I think you can also push in little ways during, the regular projects, to where you maybe have a technique you want to try and work in, or a different sort of visual idea, and just branch out within each project and be like, oh, I did something new here, and then you can, sort of shift in that direction, like bit by bit.
Yeah, I would add, sorry, dog. I would add that there's I think that's where producers and good creative directors come into play too, where it's like, if you want to do something that's like super cool and out there and the client just is not going to go for it, it's like, don't waste your creative energy and like, emotional worth, because yeah, it is definitely something that you learn over time, but like learning how to like pick your battles and like, is this the project worth like dying on my sword for, or is it going to be something else? Or if it is like, something that you really think is a great solution, like figure out a way to convince the client of that. I think that's where like creative directing really shines, is learning how to talk through projects with a client in a way that makes them feel comfortable going with something that's a little bit unconventional, and getting them excited about it. I think my partner does that super well. Like when we're doing presentations, she like gets so into it, and like she's like reading scripts with voices, and it's entertaining and fun, and it makes people like, yeah, like let's do that weird one where you were talking like in a strange voice. Like so I think, yeah, it's really just about knowing when the battle is worth being fought, and asking, if you don't know that, just asking people like who maybe have more experience than you.
Awesome. All right. And I think with that, we are a wrap. But I would love, first of all, thank all of my guests, Aaron, Gabrielle, Kelly, Stephen, and Noah, for joining us today. Love to hear a giant roaring round of applause from the virtual chat. So thank you all for joining in with us this afternoon. But we're not done yet. We're going to close out CoMotion with our awards ceremony, celebrating all the talents of the students from the Student Showcase. So join us in the YouTube premiere. We're going to share the link in the chat. And again, I want to thank MOMELove for constantly continuing to bring these interesting discussions to the panels. And I hope everybody has a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.